I used to think love was enough. I used to think David and I were different from other couples, that we'd never become those people who barely acknowledge each other across the dinner table. But here we are. And sometimes I don't even recognize the woman I've become. I'm Raven, 35, and this is the story of how I destroyed my marriage by being too damn important for a simple hug. David and I met 8 years ago when we both had nothing but ambition and a tiny apartment we could barely afford. I was hustling to make my way up in the corporate world while he was building his reputation in his field. We were a team back then, or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, maybe I was already seeing him as the supporting character in my story rather than us writing it together. Everything changed when I got that promotion last year. Suddenly, I was managing major accounts, getting invited to executive dinners, and finally becoming somebody at the company. David congratulated me with champagne and took me out to celebrate, but I could sense something in his eyes. Was it pride, or was it fear that I was leaving him behind? Either way, I didn't have time to worry about his feelings. I'd finally arrived. Andrew started at the company around the same time as my promotion. He quickly became my work confidant, someone who actually understood the pressure I was under. Unlike David, who just ran his little projects and came home at 5:30 every day, Andrew and I would stay late strategizing, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than going home. I didn't realize I was slowly chipping away at David's confidence, one backhanded compliment at a time. "You're too nice. That's your problem." I was cutting him down to make my own rise seem more impressive. I couldn't understand why David couldn't just be happy for me. Why did he need so much reassurance? Andrew certainly understood. He'd listen to me vent about David's neediness and nod sympathetically. "Sounds like he's threatened by your success," he'd say, and I'd feel validated. Meanwhile, I was conveniently forgetting dinner with his parents, but remembering every single work happy hour. I'd promised to visit his mother, Diana, but cancel last minute because of emergencies at work. She never said anything directly, but I could feel her watching me with those knowing eyes whenever we were in the same room. I'd laugh it off, tell David later his mom was old fashioned and didn't understand modern careers. What I didn't know then was that my own parents had written this exact script decades earlier. My father always working, always too important for family dinners or school plays. My mother constantly seeking his validation and growing more bitter by the year. I swore I'd never become either of them. Yet somehow I'd become the worst of both, demanding recognition while withholding affection. While I was climbing the corporate ladder and collecting validation from Andrew, David was quietly carrying burdens I didn't bother to ask about. Our marriage was crumbling, and I was too busy checking my email to notice the rubble falling around us. The morning it all fell apart started like any other. I woke up before my alarm, immediately reaching for my phone to check overnight emails. David was already in the kitchen. I could smell coffee and something cooking. Irritating, really. His morning cheerfulness always felt like a passive aggressive commentary on my stress levels. David had made breakfast: eggs, avocado toast, the works. "Thought we could use a few minutes together," he said, sliding a plate toward me. "Feel like I've barely seen you this week." I checked my watch. "I have a presentation at 9 o'clock, David. I don't have time for whatever this is." I grabbed a piece of toast in my coffee mug, moving toward my home office. "Raven, wait," he said, and something in his voice made me pause. "Can we talk just for a minute?" I sighed dramatically. "About what?" "I've been trying to tell you something for days, but you've been so busy," he said, and I noticed how tired he looked. "It's about my mom," the doctors found. My phone buzzed. Andrew, with a question about the presentation. "Sorry, I need to take this," I said, already turning away. "Can it wait until tonight?" David stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Sure, tonight." When I finally emerged, dressed and ready for battle, he was by the door putting on his jacket. "I'm heading out," he said, his voice oddly formal. "Good luck with your presentation." I was checking a last-minute email, half listening. "Thanks. Don't wait up tonight, probably doing dinner with the team after. He stood there a moment too long, and I finally looked up, irritated by his hovering. Raven, he said quietly, could I get a hug before I go? I stared at him, genuinely confused. A hug now, when I was clearly in a rush. Something about the neediness of it, the childishness of asking for affection when I was obviously busy, hit a nerve I didn't know was exposed. Are you serious right now? I snapped. You're not a kid, David. Grow up. I moved past him, grabbing my bag. I don't have time for this. I opened the door and gestured for him to leave, then slammed it behind us both. In the elevator, we stood in silence. I was already mentally rehearsing my presentation, completely missing the way David seemed to shrink into himself, how he stared straight ahead as if seeing something far beyond the elevator doors. We parted in the lobby without a word. As I drove to work, I texted Andrew one-handed. You won't believe what just happened. David asked for a hug this morning like a freaking kindergartner while I'm trying to get to my presentation. Andrew responded immediately. Yikes, man-child alert. Want me to review your slides one more time before the meeting? I smiled, feeling validated. This was what understanding looked like. This was the kind of support I deserved. The presentation was a hit. Afterward, I found Andrew by the coffee machine, and the conspiratorial smile he gave me felt like a secret handshake. Your husband still sulking over that hug? He asked, low enough that others couldn't hear. I rolled my eyes, enjoying having someone who got it. God, you should have seen him. Like, I have time to coddle his feelings before the biggest presentation of the quarter. Men can be so emotionally needy, Andrew agreed. Some people just can't handle being with a powerful woman. That afternoon, I detailed the morning's events to Andrew over lunch, embellishing slightly. In my version, David had practically begged for attention, whining about how I never made time for him anymore. What I didn't know was that David had received the final confirmation of layoffs at his company the day before. What I didn't know was that his mother, Diana's routine checkup, had revealed cancer that had already spread to her lymph nodes. When he asked for that hug, it wasn't neediness. It was a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. For the next 2 weeks, I barely noticed how little we spoke. David left for work before I woke up and was often asleep or pretending to be when I came home. On weekends, he mentioned visiting his mother, but I was too preoccupied to ask for details. When I bothered to notice his absence, I told myself it was a relief not to deal with his neediness. At work, Andrew became increasingly attentive, finding reasons for us to collaborate on projects and suggesting late meetings that inevitably turned into dinner or drinks. I told myself this was networking, career advancement, certainly not the emotional affair it was rapidly becoming. It's like David doesn't even see how important my work is, I complained to Andrew one evening over martinis. He acts like I should drop everything because his mom has some health scare. Andrew nodded sympathetically, though something flickered in his eyes. What exactly is wrong with his mom? I paused, realizing I didn't actually know. Some tests or something, I said vaguely. He tried to tell me, but picked literally the worst time. The truth was that David had stopped trying to tell me anything. The man who once shared every thought with me now moved through our apartment like a ghost, taking care not to disturb me. And the most disturbing part, I preferred it this way. My sister Camille's surprise visit 3 weeks after the hug incident was the first crack in my self-delusion. She showed up on a Saturday when David was supposedly at his mother's. Where's David? She asked after greeting me. At his mom's again. I rolled my eyes. He's been there every weekend lately. You'd think she was dying or something. Camille gave me an odd look. Is she sick? I shrugged. Some health thing. He tried to tell me, but I was in the middle of prep for a massive presentation. Camille followed me to the kitchen. So, you don't know what's wrong with your mother-in-law? I've been swamped at work, Cam. Major accounts, executive track potential. She studied me with uncomfortable intensity. The David I know would never keep something important from you unless he felt he couldn't tell you. Before I could respond, David walked in. He stopped short seeing Camille, but his surprise quickly transformed into genuine warmth as he hugged her. Camille, this is a nice surprise. The hug lasted a beat longer than normal, and I felt an unexpected pang watching them. How are you? She asked, her tone suggesting a deeper question than casual greeting. Managing, he said with a tired smile. That's when his phone rang. David checked the screen and his expression changed, a flash of worry before he composed himself. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into our bedroom, closing the door. When he emerged a few minutes later, his face was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in his jaw. Everything okay? Camille asked. Just Mom's doctor, he said, not looking at me. They're adjusting her treatment schedule. Treatment for what? Camille asked the question I should have asked weeks ago. David's eyes flickered to me before answering. The breast cancer. They found it 6 weeks ago, but it's already in her lymph nodes. He paused. Stage 3. I felt like I'd been slapped. 6 weeks ago. That was before the hug morning. David, I started, but he was already gathering his keys and wallet. I should get back to the hospital. They're doing another round of tests today. David, wait. How are you holding up with all this? And with... Camille glanced at me. Everything else? He gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on what matters. Again, his eyes deliberately avoided mine. Olivia next door has been amazing. She's been helping coordinate Mom's care team since she knows the hospital system. Olivia? I blurted. Who's Olivia? Our neighbor from 4B, David said flatly. She's been bringing dinner for Mom and me at the hospital most nights. With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him. Camille turned to me, eyes wide. Raven, what the hell is going on? His mother has cancer. He's spending evenings with some neighbor, and you don't know any of this? I sank onto a bar stool, genuinely stunned. I've been busy with work. He never said it was cancer. Did you ever give him the chance to tell you? I thought back to that morning, him trying to talk about his mother, me brushing him off for a text from Andrew. There's something else, Camille said carefully. When I hugged him, Raven, he felt different, like he's lost weight. And did you see how tired he looks? I hadn't. I genuinely hadn't noticed anything about my own husband in weeks. What happened between you two? She asked. I thought about telling her some sanitized version of events, but suddenly the truth came pouring out. The hug, the door slamming, my cruel words. You know what that reminds me of, she finally said. Dad, remember how he'd make Mom feel small whenever she needed anything from him? The comparison felt like a physical blow. All my life, I'd sworn I'd never become our emotionally unavailable father. Yet here I was, treating David exactly as Dad had treated Mom. After Camille left for her hotel, I sat alone in our apartment, really seeing it for the first time in months. David's presence had been fading gradually, his books no longer on the coffee table, his favorite mug missing from the dish rack, subtle signs of withdrawal I'd been too self-absorbed to notice. I opened our shared home office looking for clues to his life I'd been ignoring. His desk was tidied as if he barely used it anymore. On impulse, I checked our filing cabinet and found medical documents. Diana's cancer diagnosis from 6 weeks earlier, treatment plans, prognosis notes, poor to moderate, and insurance forms with alarming numbers. Beneath those was another folder labeled simply work. Inside was a formal layoff notice dated the day before the hug incident, along with unemployment application paperwork. And this surprised me. Several freelance contracts dated within the past 2 weeks. My husband had lost his job, his mother was dying, and he had been rebuilding his career alone while I had been mocking him to Andrew for being emotionally needy. The apartment door opened, startling me. David stood there looking even more exhausted than before. What are you doing? He asked, seeing the papers spread around me. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, which was perhaps the worst possible response. About your job? About your mom? Any of it. Something shifted in his expression, not anger, which I could have handled, but a calm detachment that frightened me. I tried, he said simply. That morning, the one where you told me to grow up, I was going to tell you everything, my layoff, mom's diagnosis, all of it, but you were too busy, remember? You could have tried again, I argued weakly. I did for years, Raven. Every time I needed you, you had something more important. Every time I shared a concern, you dismissed it. Every time I reached out, he trailed off, shaking his head. That morning wasn't the beginning, it was the end. Was me finally accepting what you've been showing me for years, that I don't matter to you. That's not true, I protested. Then where is my mother being treated? He asked quietly. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What stage is her cancer? Stage 3? And what's her oncologist's name? Silence. Who's been covering her medical expenses? More silence. These aren't trick questions, Raven. They're the basic details of my life for the past 6 weeks. His calm was devastating. I would have preferred yelling, anything but this detached recitation of my failures. The hug, I said desperately. You're overreacting to one bad morning when I was stressed. It was never about the hug, he interrupted, his voice still terrifyingly calm. The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying for years. You don't want a partner, you want an audience. That's not fair, I said, feeling tears threatening. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you remembered something important to me? When was the last time you chose me over work, even once? Each question landed like a physical blow because I knew the answer to all of them. I couldn't remember. His quiet certainty terrified me more than any argument could have. I'd always been the one in control, the one who decided the terms of our relationship. Now David was walking away with a clarity I didn't possess, and it shook me to my core. You can't just leave, I said, hating how childish I sounded. I already have, he replied simply, emotionally anyway. I've been leaving for months while you were too busy with Andrew to notice. The mention of Andrew stung. He's a colleague, I said automatically. He's whatever you need him to be, David said, and the sad understanding in his voice was worse than accusation. As he gathered some clothes and toiletries, I followed him around the apartment, alternating between anger and pleading. His calm remained unshaken, which only fueled my growing panic. This isn't fair, I insisted. You're making a massive decision based on one bad morning. No, I'm making it based on hundreds of bad mornings, missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and dismissive comments. The hug was just the final data point. A week passed with no word from David beyond practical texts about bills and mail. Andrew continued to be mysteriously unavailable, always with a work excuse that I now recognized as the brush-offs they were. When I finally confronted him in person at the office, his response was revealing. Look, Raven, I enjoy our work conversations, but I'm not getting involved in your personal drama. That's not what this is. What is this exactly? I asked, suddenly seeing our relationship for what it was, not the deep connection I'd convinced myself existed, but a shallow alliance of convenience. He looked uncomfortable. We're colleagues, work friends. I'm not your therapist or your divorce counsel. All those lunches, happy hours, late night text sessions, they meant nothing to him beyond office entertainment. I'd been sharing intimate details of my marriage, seeking his validation, while to him, I was just another work acquaintance. I spent that weekend alone in our apartment, really thinking about what Camille and David had said. I scrolled through photos from early in our marriage. David and me laughing on hiking trips, cooking together, looking at each other with genuine love. When had I stopped seeing him? When had his feelings become inconvenient intrusions rather than the foundations of our partnership? On Monday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a day off work without a specific reason. I drove to Diana's house, rehearsing what I would say to David. But when I arrived, Only Diana was there, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that had always seemed to see right through me. "Raven," she said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "David's not here." "Could I wait for him?" I asked. She studied me for a long moment. "He's with Olivia at a consultation with my new specialist. They'll be gone most of the day." "Olivia," I repeated, feeling a stab of jealousy. "They seem close." "She's been a godsend," Diana confirmed. "She drives me to appointments when David has work commitments, brings dinner most nights, knows all my medications." She paused meaningfully. "She sees him, Raven. Really sees him." The implication was clear. "Unlike me, I want to fix things," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Diana sighed. "Some things can't be fixed. Some broken trust can't be restored." "I made mistakes," I admitted. "Big ones. But 8 years of marriage has to count for something." "It counted for everything to David," she said quietly. "That's why he tried so hard for so long. That's why he kept hoping you'd see him again. And now?" I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. "Now he's learning to build a life where he doesn't need to beg for basic kindness." When I finally left, she called after me. "Raven!" I turned back. "He did love you completely. I hope you find someone you love that much someday." Her use of the past tense, "did love you," followed me all the way home. The final conversation happened 2 weeks later. David asked to meet at a neutral coffee shop to discuss practical matters. I spent hours preparing what I would say, how I would make him see that I could change. But when he walked in, I knew immediately. The man sitting across from me wasn't the husband who had asked for a hug that morning. He was someone new, calmer, more centered, with a quiet confidence I'd never seen before. "I think we should file for divorce," he said after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. "I've drawn up a fair division of assets. You can have the apartment." No preamble, no drama, just a simple statement of fact that left no room for negotiation. "Just like that," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "You're throwing away 8 years without even trying to fix things." "I did try," he said gently. "For years, Raven, every dinner I made that you missed, every conversation you cut short, every time I reached out and you pulled away, those were all me trying." "One bad morning," I started. "It was never about the hug," he interrupted. "How many times do I need to say that? The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying. You checked out of this marriage long before I did." "That's not fair," I protested, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Isn't it? Tell me, what's my mother's oncologist's name?" I stared at him, unable to answer. "Dr. Melissa Chen," he supplied. "She's been treating Mom for almost 2 months now. What company am I freelancing for?" Again, I had no answer. "Robertson Design. I've mentioned it at least 3 times in texts about scheduling. What medication did I start taking 6 weeks ago?" My confusion must have shown on my face. "Antidepressants," he said quietly. "I've been in therapy since before the hug incident for depression caused by years of emotional neglect." Each fact landed like a physical blow, not because they were meant to hurt me, but because they revealed how completely I had failed to see the person I had promised to love. "I didn't know," I whispered. "You didn't ask," he replied, not unkindly. "You stopped asking years ago." His words stripped away my last defenses. In that moment, I finally saw the truth I'd been avoiding. I had become my father. I had treated David exactly as Dad had treated Mom, as an inconvenience, a supporting character, someone whose needs were always secondary to my own importance. "It was never about the hug," I whispered, finally understanding. "No," David agreed. "It was about everything the hug represented: connection, vulnerability, basic human kindness, things that should be given freely in a marriage, not treated as impositions." He slid a folder across the table. "Divorce papers already prepared. Take your time reviewing these. There's no rush." As he stood to leave, I found myself asking the question that had been haunting me. Were you ever going to tell me about your mom, your job, the depression, any of it? He paused. I did tell you, Raven. Many times, in many ways. You just weren't listening. With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with the wreckage of a marriage I had systematically destroyed. The days that followed passed in a blur. Andrew continued avoiding me at work, eventually admitting awkwardly that he'd been promoted to lead the Henderson account, an account that should have been mine. He'd been using our friendship to gather information and ideas, all while positioning himself as my replacement. When I finally returned to the office after taking some time off, I discovered my position had been quietly downgraded, my most significant accounts reassigned. The empire I'd sacrificed my marriage for was crumbling, revealing how hollow it had been all along. Months later, I ran into them at a farmer's market. David, Olivia, and Diana in a wheelchair. Diana looked frailer but was smiling, pointing out produce while Olivia filled a basket. David stood beside his mother, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He saw me before I could retreat. For a moment, I thought he might pretend not to notice me, but instead he said something to the women and walked over. Raven, he said with polite warmth but no lingering attachment. How are you? I'm okay, I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. How's your mom doing? Fighting hard, he said, glancing back at Diana with obvious love. The new treatment is tough, but she's tougher. And you? I couldn't help asking. Are you happy? He considered the question seriously. I'm at peace, he finally said. Working on projects I care about, spending time with people who see me. The implication was clear, but not cruel. It was simply truth. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. You deserve that. As I watched him return to them, I felt a strange mixture of regret and acceptance. I had lost something precious through my own blindness and cruelty, but perhaps the pain of that recognition was the beginning of growth, a chance to become someone different from my father, someone capable of seeing others as whole people rather than supporting characters in my story. The woman who had slammed the door on her husband's request for a hug would always be part of me, but she didn't have to be all of me. That at least was something I could change. Not for David, not for any future relationship, but for myself, because he had been right about the most important thing. It was never about the hug. It was about everything the hug represented. And maybe, just maybe, understanding that was the first step toward becoming someone worthy of the connection I had so carelessly thrown away.